When you think of ancient Persia, what comes to mind? A vast, glittering empire stretching from the Indus Valley to the shores of Greece. You might picture Cyrus the Great, the benevolent king who freed the Jews and authored the world's first charter of human rights. You might imagine Persepolis, the jewel of the Achaemenid dynasty, a city of staggering wealth and multicultural harmony. This was the empire that gave us intricate art, advanced irrigation, a postal service, and a vision of a unified world. It was, by all accounts, a paradise of civilization in an age of barbarism. But what if I told you that beneath this shimmering veneer of progress and enlightenment lay a world of unimaginable cruelty? A society where justice was not just blind, but barbaric. A place where a single misspoken word could lead to a fate worse than death, where your entire family could be erased for your mistake, and where the punishments were so diabolical they sound like they were ripped from the pages of a horror novel. The Persia of postcards and history books is only half the story. Today, we're not just visiting the palaces, we're descending into the dungeons. We're pulling back the curtain to reveal the horrifying things that were considered perfectly normal in the mighty Persian Empire. Forget what you think you know. This is the brutal reality of a world where paradise was protected by pure, calculated terror. To understand the Persian psyche, you have to start with one, all-consuming concept: truth. For the ancient Persians, particularly under the influence of the Zoroastrian faith, truth, or Asha, wasn't just a virtue, it was a cosmic force, the very foundation of order in the universe. Its opposite, the lie, or Druj, was the embodiment of chaos, evil, and the work of the malevolent spirit, Ahriman. This wasn't a casual preference for honesty, it was a holy war waged in every word spoken. The Greek historian Herodotus, who was both an admirer and an adversary of the Persians, famously noted that from the age of 5 to 20, Persian boys were taught only three things: to ride a horse, to draw a bow, and to speak the truth. He wrote, "They hold it the most disgraceful thing in the world to tell a lie, the next worst, to owe a debt, because, among other reasons, the debtor is obliged to tell lies." This obsession with truth was carved into the very stone of the empire. On the monumental Behistun inscription, King Darius the Great repeatedly boasts of his victories over rebels, whom he universally brands as liars. He declares, "I smote them and took them prisoner." The lie made them rebellious. For Darius, rebellion and falsehood were one and the same. To defy the king was to defy cosmic truth itself. So, what happened if you were caught in a lie? In our modern world, a lie might earn you a scolding or social disapproval. In ancient Persia, it could cost you everything. The punishment depended on the severity of the falsehood. A minor lie might result in social ostracism or a public shaming, which in a tight-knit, honor-based society was a devastating fate. But a lie told in court, a lie that affected a contract, or a lie told to a person of authority could lead to horrific consequences. The legal codes were merciless. Perjury could be punished with the same penalty that the accused would have faced, so if you falsely accused a man of treason, you could be executed in his place. For merchants who used false weights or measures, the punishments could range from the confiscation of all property to severe flogging or even mutilation. The message was clear and absolute: the empire was built on a foundation of order, and a lie was an act of metaphysical terrorism designed to crumble that foundation. Before we even get to the more gruesome physical punishments, imagine living in a society with this level of psychological pressure, where a single slip of the tongue could be interpreted as an alliance with the forces of darkness, marking you as an enemy of the entire cosmos. Of all the horrifying punishments devised by humanity, few can rival the sheer, drawn-out agony of scaphism. The name itself, derived from the Greek word scaph meaning boat or trough, barely hints at the nightmare it entailed. This was a method of execution so vile, so monstrously inventive, that even the ancient writers who documented it seemed to struggle to describe its full horror. Our most detailed account comes from the Greek historian Plutarch, in his biography of the Persian king Artaxerxes II. He describes the fate of a soldier named Mithridates, who had the misfortune of accidentally killing the king's beloved brother, Cyrus the Younger, in battle. While he was initially rewarded for his role in securing the king's victory, he made a fatal mistake. he boasted about it publicly. For this slight against the king's honor, Artaxerxes condemned him to death by scaphism. So, what was it? The victim was taken to a stagnant, mosquito-infested swamp or pond. There, they were placed inside a hollowed-out log or, more commonly, fastened between two narrow rowing boats, one on top of the other, creating a kind of coffin. The victim's head, hands, and feet were left sticking out, but the rest of their body was trapped inside this wooden shell. And then, the torture began. The executioners would force-feed the condemned a nauseating mixture of milk and honey. They wouldn't just make them drink it, they would pour it all over their face, into their eyes, and over any exposed skin, until it dripped and caked everywhere. The purpose was twofold. First, the rich diet would induce terrible, uncontrollable diarrhea, which would fill the confined space of the boats, creating a festering swamp of human waste. Second, the thick, sweet layer of milk and honey covering their face and limbs was an irresistible attractant for every insect in the area. Left under the sweltering sun, the victim became a living, breathing buffet. Flies, wasps, and beetles would swarm their face, laying eggs in their eyes, ears, and nostrils. Worse, the filth accumulating inside the boats would attract vermin and insects that would begin to burrow into the victim's flesh, feeding on them and breeding within their body. To prolong the agony, the executioners would return each day to force-feed the victim more milk and honey, keeping them alive and conscious for as long as possible. Death would not come from a single, merciful blow. It would be a slow, agonizing process of infection, septic shock, dehydration, and being eaten alive from the inside out. Plutarch reports that Mithridates lingered for 17 days before he finally succumbed. Scaphism wasn't just an execution, it was a statement. It was a descent into the slowest, most disgusting, and most psychologically shattering death imaginable, a clear message of what happened to those who offended the absolute power of the Persian king. The Achaemenid Empire was the largest the world had ever seen, a sprawling territory that encompassed dozens of different peoples, languages, and cultures. How did one man, the great king, sitting on his throne in Susa or Persepolis, maintain control over such a vast and diverse realm? The answer lies in one of the most effective and terrifying intelligence networks of the ancient world, the infamous eyes and ears of the king. This wasn't a formal, publicly acknowledged organization. It was a clandestine network of spies, informants, and secret agents whose sole loyalty was to the king himself. They moved silently through every level of society, from the bustling markets of Babylon to the opulent courts of the regional governors, known as satraps. Their mission was simple: to watch, to listen, and to report any hint of corruption, discontent, or, most importantly, treason. The Greek philosopher Xenophon, in his work the Cyropaedia, gives us insight into the system's logic. He attributes its creation to Cyrus the Great, who supposedly realized that he couldn't be everywhere at once. So, he established a network of trusted individuals to act as his proxy observers. These agents were often chosen from lower social strata, giving them a powerful incentive to be loyal to the king who elevated them. They had the authority to question anyone, inspect anything, and report their findings directly to the royal court, bypassing the entire chain of command. Imagine the psychological effect of this. You're a powerful satrap, ruling over a wealthy province hundreds of miles from the capital. You might be tempted to skim a little tax revenue or build a private army. But you can never be sure who is watching. Is it the quiet stable boy who tends to your horses? The traveling merchant who seems to ask too many questions? Your own trusted advisor? The eyes and ears were everywhere and nowhere at once. This institutionalized paranoia was a brilliant tool of statecraft. It kept ambitious nobles in check not through overt force, but through the constant, gnawing fear of the unknown. A single careless word at a dinner party, a letter that wasn't sufficiently deferential to the king, any of it could be reported back, and the consequences would be swift and final. This system effectively made every subject a potential spy and every neighbor a potential threat. It fostered an atmosphere where trust was a dangerous liability. While the royal road and the official bureaucracy were the visible structures holding the empire together, it was this invisible web of fear, spun by the eyes and ears of the king, that truly ensured the absolute authority of the throne. It was a surveillance state on a scale that was unprecedented in the ancient world. In the courts of the Persian kings, the lines of family and politics were not just blurred, they were often completely erased. One of the most shocking customs to modern eyes, and even to many of their contemporaries, was the practice of royal incest, specifically what is known as quidota. While the exact prevalence and interpretation of this practice are debated by scholars, the historical accounts, both from Greek sources and later Persian texts, point to a tradition of next-of-kin marriage that was considered not just acceptable, but virtuous within the ruling class and Zoroastrian priesthood. The Achaemenid dynasty provides several stark examples. Cambyses II, the son and successor of Cyrus the Great, is said by Herodotus to have married two of his own full sisters, Atossa and Roxanne. This was so far outside even Persian norms at the time that he reportedly had to convene a panel of royal judges to pass a new law permitting him to do what he pleased. Later, Artaxerxes II, the same king who condemned Mithridates to scaphism, is also recorded as marrying his own daughter, another Atossa. Why would they do this? The motivations were a complex mix of power, purity, and piety. Politically, marrying a sister, half-sister, or daughter was a masterstroke of consolidation. It kept power and, just as importantly, immense wealth, securely within the immediate family. A royal princess was a powerful asset, and marrying her to a foreign prince or a powerful noble could create a future rival. By marrying her himself, the king ensured her loyalty and her fortune remained under his direct control. There was also a powerful concept of preserving the sanctity of the royal bloodline. The Achaemenid kings saw themselves as a divinely appointed lineage, and mixing their blood with that of lesser nobles could be seen as diluting their sacred heritage. Marrying a close relative ensured the purity of the line remained intact. Finally, there was a potential religious justification. Later Zoroastrian texts from the Sasanian period, which came after the Achaemenids, speak of quidota as a meritorious act, a religious duty that could even help to repel evil spirits. While it's contentious to apply these later texts directly to the Achaemenid era, it suggests that the idea wasn't seen as a depraved taboo, but possibly as a sacred practice for the elite. For the average Persian, this was likely not a common practice, but for the king, who existed on a plane between the human and the divine, the normal rules of society simply did not apply. His family was not like other families, it was the celestial family, and it was to be preserved at any cost. When your whole family pays for your crime. Visuals, a dramatic reenactment of a man being arrested, with his family looking on in horror. Images of ancient legal tablets. A shot of a family being led away in chains. The modern concept of justice is deeply individualistic. You are responsible for your actions, and you alone are punished for your crimes. In ancient Persia, this was a foreign and dangerously naive idea. They operated under a far more terrifying principle, collective punishment. If you committed a grave offense, especially a crime against the state like treason or rebellion, the punishment would not stop with you. It would cascade through your entire family, extinguishing your lineage as a warning to all others. This wasn't random cruelty, it was a calculated policy of political security. The logic was cold and brutal. If a nobleman conspired against the king and was executed, his sons, brothers, or cousins might grow up nursing a desire for revenge. They could become a rallying point for other disgruntled factions, a seed of future rebellion. The only way to ensure the threat was truly neutralized was to uproot the entire family tree. Herodotus provides a chilling account of this principle in action. After a conspiracy known as the Revolt of the Seven, which brought Darius the Great to power, one of the conspirators, Intafrines, committed an act of insolence against the new king. Darius, fearing a wider plot, had Intafrines arrested along with his son and all his male relatives. They were bound in chains and condemned to death. In a strange twist, Intafrines' wife pleaded with Darius, not for her husband or son, but for her brother, arguing that she could get another husband and other children, but with her parents dead, she could never have another brother. Amused by her logic, Darius spared her brother but proceeded with the execution of her husband, her son, and all of her husband's other male kin. This practice is also confirmed in the biblical book of Daniel, set during the period of Persian influence. When Daniel's enemies conspire against him and are found to be liars, the king orders that the accusers, along with their wives and children, be thrown into the lion's den. The text grimly notes that the lions overpowered them before they even reached the floor of the den. Living under such a system meant that the stakes for every decision were astronomically high. It wasn't just your own life on the line. Your ambition, your miscalculation, or your defiance could bring death and destruction upon everyone you loved, your children, who had done nothing wrong, your brothers, who had no part in your schemes, your entire clan, erased from history because of your actions. It was the ultimate deterrent, a legal framework that turned family from a source of strength into a potential liability, a group of hostages held against your own good behavior. What happens when a crime is committed, but there are no witnesses and no confession? In our world, the case might go cold. In ancient Persia, they turned to a higher authority, divine judgment. When human law reached its limits, they employed the terrifying practice of trial by ordeal, a physical test where the outcome was believed to reveal the will of the gods. Guilt or innocence was written not in evidence, but on the body of the accused. This practice was especially prominent during the Sasanian Empire, the successor to the Achaemenids, where Zoroastrian legal texts provide explicit details. These were not simple tests, they were life or death gambles designed to invoke a miracle as proof of innocence. One of the most common ordeals was the ordeal of fire. The accused might be forced to walk through flames, or, as described in some texts, have molten metal, usually bronze or copper, poured directly onto their bare chest. The theory was simple and terrifying: if the person was innocent, the divine beings, the Yazatas, would intervene and protect them from harm. They would emerge from the ordeal unscathed, their innocence proven beyond all doubt. If they were guilty, however, the gods would offer no protection, and they would suffer a gruesome, fiery death, their guilt confirmed by their very burns. Another common method was the ordeal of water. The accused would be bound and thrown into a river. If they sank, they were considered innocent, though they would have to be quickly rescued to avoid drowning. If they floated, it was believed that the sacred water was rejecting them due to their guilt, and they were promptly taken out and executed. There were also ordeals by poison. The accused would be given a controlled dose of a poison, like sulfur or arsenic. If they survived, they were innocent. If they died, they were guilty. In every case, the logic was the same: human justice is fallible, but the divine order is perfect. The ordeal was a way to force the hand of the gods, to make them reveal the hidden truth. Imagine the sheer terror of facing such a trial. There was no room for legal arguments, no cross-examination of witnesses. Your fate rested on a coin flip with the cosmos. It was a system that conflated survival with innocence and suffering with guilt, a terrifying testament to a worldview where the courtroom was not a place of reason, but a supernatural arena where divine forces passed the final, unappealable sentence. While many Persian punishments were creative in their cruelty, one stood out for its brutal simplicity and its power as a tool of psychological warfare: impalement. This method of execution was not invented by the Persians. They likely adopted it from the notoriously brutal Neo-Assyrians, but they perfected its use as a public spectacle of state power. The process was as straightforward as it was agonizing. A long, sharpened stake, often not sharpened to a fine point to prevent a quick death, was driven into the ground. The victim was then forced down onto it, with the stake entering the body through the torso. Sometimes they were lifted and dropped onto the stake, using their own body weight to drive it deeper. Death was excruciatingly slow, sometimes taking days, as the stake would slowly work its way up through the body, rupturing organs along the way. The victim would die from a combination of massive internal bleeding, organ failure, and dehydration, all while being fully conscious for much of the process. But the horror of impalement wasn't just in the act itself. It was in the display. The Persians didn't hide their executions in dungeons, they made them a centerpiece of their military and political messaging. When a city rebelled and was reconquered, its leaders would be publicly impaled on the city walls or along major roads. This created what could only be described as a garden of death, a forest of writhing bodies left to rot in the sun as a grotesque and unforgettable warning to anyone else who might contemplate defiance. We don't have to guess about this. King Darius the Great himself immortalized his use of this punishment on the Behistun inscription. This massive rock face carving, a piece of royal propaganda, details his rise to power and his crushing of numerous rebellions. The accompanying sculptures proudly depict the captured rebel leaders being punished. One of them, Forties of Media, is shown impaled upon a stake, his body contorted in agony. The inscription matter-of-factly states, he was impaled at Ecbatana. For Darius, this wasn't an act of shameful brutality to be hidden, it was a righteous and necessary act of justice to be advertised to the entire empire for generations to come. This public display of impaled bodies was a form of communication more powerful than any written decree. It was a visceral message of the futility of rebellion and the absolute, merciless power of the king. It turned the very landscape into a testament to his authority, ensuring that fear would maintain order where loyalty might fail. In the Persian justice system, death was not the only horrifying outcome. For a wide range of crimes that were deemed serious but not quite worthy of execution, there was another, deeply personal form of punishment, mutilation. This wasn't a rare or exceptional sentence, it was a standard, codified part of their legal framework, a way to permanently mark a person as a criminal and ensure their punishment was a lifelong burden. The forms of mutilation were varied and specific to the crime. A thief might have their hand cut off. A spy or an eavesdropper could have their ears sliced from their head. A spreader of seditious rumors might have their tongue cut out. One of the most common forms of mutilation, especially for political conspirators or failed rebels who were spared execution, was the cutting off of the nose and ears. This practice served two brutal purposes. The first was the immediate, searing pain of the punishment itself. But the second, and perhaps more insidious purpose, was the creation of a living warning. A mutilated person was marked for life. They carried their shame and their crime on their very face. Every day, for the rest of their lives, they would be seen not as a person, but as a criminal. This made them a social outcast, unable to find good work, marry into a respectable family, or ever escape the shadow of their past. It was a social death that long outlasted the physical pain. Herodotus is filled with accounts of this practice. He tells the story of Zopyrus, a Persian nobleman who was so dedicated to helping Darius conquer Babylon that he mutilated himself. He cut off his own nose and ears and, covered in whip marks, presented himself to the Babylonians as a tortured deserter seeking revenge on the Persian king. The Babylonians, seeing his horrific and all too familiar injuries, believed his story and gave him command of their army, which he promptly betrayed to Darius. The very fact that this ruse was believable shows how commonplace the sight of such mutilated individuals must have been. This was a world where justice was inscribed directly onto the human body. The state didn't just punish you, it rewrote your physical identity, turning you into a walking billboard for its power. The message was clear: you can survive your crime, but you will never be allowed to forget it, and neither will anyone who ever looks upon you. At the heart of Persian spiritual life were the Magi, the priestly caste of Zoroastrianism. They were the keepers of sacred knowledge, interpreters of dreams, and advisors to kings. While Zoroastrianism itself, with its emphasis on truth, light, and the eternal struggle against darkness, is often seen as a highly ethical and progressive religion, the rituals and practices of the Magi could be deeply unsettling, even horrifying, to outsiders. Perhaps the most startling of their customs was their treatment of the dead. According to Zoroastrian belief, the elements of earth, fire, and water were sacred and pure. To bury or cremate a corpse would be to defile these sacred elements with decaying flesh. Their solution was a practice known as ritual exposure. When a person died, their body was carried to a barren, desolate place, often the top of a hill, where a circular stone structure called a dogma, or Tower of Silence, was built. The naked body was placed on the stone platform and left exposed to the elements and, most importantly, to scavenging birds. Vultures would descend upon the corpse and, within a matter of hours, strip the bones of all flesh. Once the bones were picked clean and bleached by the sun, they were collected and placed in an ossuary pit at the center of the tower. To the Magi, this was the purest and most righteous way to dispose of the dead, a final act of charity where one's useless body could provide sustenance to the creatures of the sky. To outsiders, like the Greeks, it was a barbaric and ghoulish spectacle. The Magi's influence went far beyond funerals. They were masters of astrology and divination, believing the fate of men and empires could be read in the stars. Their interpretations of royal dreams or celestial omens could start wars, seal treaties, or condemn rivals. They were also believed to possess esoteric knowledge of magic and incantations, able to both ward off evil spirits and potentially curse their enemies. This immense spiritual authority gave them tremendous political power. They were an integral part of the royal court, and their support could make or break a king. This sometimes led them into the dark world of political intrigue. After the death of King Cambyses II, a magus named Gaumata famously impersonated the king's deceased brother and seized the throne, ruling for several months before being unmasked and killed by Darius the Great. This event shows that the Magi were not just passive priests, they were active, ambitious players in the high-stakes game of Persian power, and their mysterious rituals and immense influence made them a force to be feared by all. So, we return to that glittering image of ancient Persia. An empire of poets, architects, and administrators. A beacon of civilization. And it was all of those things. But it was also a place of unimaginable brutality, where the state's survival was built on a foundation of fear. Where cosmic truth was enforced with molten metal, where family could be a death sentence, and where the king's displeasure could lead to a fate literally worse than death. The horrifying things that were normal in ancient Persia serve as a chilling reminder that civilization and cruelty are not always opposites. Sometimes, they grow together, intertwined in a complex and terrifying dance. The Persians created a paradise, but it was a paradise with a very dark, and very brutal, price of admission. What do you think? Which of these ancient practices did you find the most horrifying? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If you learned something new and want to explore more of the dark corners of history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you know someone who thinks history is boring, share this video with them and show them just how wrong they are. Thanks for watching.